Welcome everyone, today we have a new build guide for Diablo 4. In this video, we're looking into a level 100 endgame Barbarian. And this Barbarian is going to be very interesting, because as we go through the skill trees, the legendaries and also the Paragon levels, what you're going to see is we actually have two variations of the build, which with different legendaries, with different skill perks and also with different play styles, fighting different monsters of different type and also gaining bonus damage. So I have been spending a lot of time looking to Barbarian, and it is very interesting with so many uniques and also so many legendaries to pick from. Now, as a brief summary of this particular Barbarian build, we'll be doing bleeding damage with Rend and also dealing more damage with Rapture. We'll also be going with Wrath of Berserker, gaining a massive amount of movement speed, unstoppable, and also resource regeneration. We'll be dealing multiple ways of damage through bleeding, and we have two variations. The first variation is we'll be stunning enemies and dealing additional damage this way. The second variation is we'll have a lot more damage against single target boss, against unstoppable bosses and also the world boss. So we have two variations for different boss mode. So what I do in the video is I'll go through the skill tree of the first build and we go through the legendaries, and then we go through the skill tree of the second build of the variation and we go through the legendaries as well. The Paragon level is very similar, so those are the same. So coming over to a skill tree for the first type of Barbarian build, this is when you'll be stunning enemies and doing lots of damage. So we'll be going with 1 point into Flay, and also Flay allows us to deal more bleeding damage. Over here we'll go with 5 points into Rend, and also Rend provides us with more Fury. Yes, we can go with Rend dealing more damage against vulnerable enemies, but I don't think it's a big deal. Here we'll have 3 points into Core Spells, having a chance of debuffing enemies with vulnerability, which would be very nice. And over here, we'll also gain additional Fury using Flay, so this is very good because we'll be using two-handed weapon. Now once we come over to the defense section, you can notice that I have perked 1 point into Rally Cry and also its upgrades, allowing us to gain a boost of movement speed, resource generation and also fortify. So this is both utility and also mobility and also defensive. Now 1 point will be going to Ground Stomp, which allows us to have a guaranteed stun every 16 seconds. With Ground Stomp, we also have increased duration of the stunning, which will be very powerful, you'll see very soon. We have so much crowd control. And over here, we also lower the cooldown of our ultimate skill, which is going to be Berserk, and this will be very important. Now as we move over to the brawling section, you can see that I have went into additional movement speed, so this Barbarian is ideally going to be super fast. And while we're Berserking, we have damage reduction and also we have more Fury gain through Berserking. Once we come over to the weapon mastery, notice we have perked into a lot of passives. We're going with 1 point in a lot of the active spells simply because the gain of those spells is just not enough. So I'll give you guys an example what I mean by that. So I'll try to take away some of the points over here, and if I go with Rapture, notice Rapture loses 0.5 seconds per skill point, and this is not a massive gain, right? So this is why I'm going with level 1 of the skills and going with more passives. Now for the upgrades of Rapture, I'm going with increased attack speed, which will be really good for resource gain and also more damage. Now we'll be going with 1 point that hamstring of bleeding slows enemies, and while enemies are vulnerable, will also deal 18% additional bleeding damage. Over here, the Barbarian has a lot of good passives, so dealing more damage to close enemies and also damage reduction, and also having more damage against injured enemies, and also having more critical strike chance. And those will be very important because we'll be stunning enemies and also slowing enemies with not stop. Because we always slow enemies who are bleeding, we'll also be stunning enemies and getting more benefits. Now because we have a few of the skills like the shots over here that provide us with Fortify, over here we also can gain more Fortify when taking damage. And while Fortify, we'll be dealing additional damage, about 12% damage, while we Fortify over 50% life. And we'll find more ways to become Fortify as well. Now as we come over to the ultimate section, we'll go with Wrath of Berserker. This allows us to have the Wrath of Berserker active, and this with a faster attack speed allows the Wrath of Berserker to extend to at least 10 seconds. While this is activated, we have more movement speed and also more resource regeneration, and also we gain more damage through the Fury spending. Here we'll be going with 3 points into the additional critical strike damage with two-hand weapon, and this will be very important, because this is one of the few perks that allows Barbarian to gain critical strike damage. Now finally, coming over to the key passives, we'll be going with the Gashing Wound, which is going to be the ideal build for the bleeding build, which allows us to gain a lot of critical chance and also a lot of critical strike and convert that into bonus amount of bleeding damage. So we can kind of critical strike with bleeding, and this allows us to double some amount of bleeding damage when we actually have critical strike. And when we overpower, which is not that often of course, we still do additional damage in terms of bleeding. Now the build also have some variations, because we can also go with Unbirch Rage, which allows us to deal 130% more damage, but with a cost of 100% more fury. So I have perked into a lot of talents, a lot of abilities, a lot of paragons that gains us fury. And if you do find yourself with a lot of fury, you can unperk this one and also come over to this one. So this allows us to be very flexible with the key passives. Now of course guys, because we're going with a Berserker, it is always optional to go with the Unrestrained, and over here Unconstrained allows us to have longer duration of Berserk and also bonus damage. But I don't think this is the strongest. Later in game, as you get more critical chance and also more critical damage, this is much better. And over here, when you have a lot of fury, this is always very powerful. So the option is ours. We can pick any of the 3 of the perks over here and try them out for the damage. Now coming over to our legendaries and also choices of the aspects. So this is the first build. We'll look into the second build very soon. I know so much to look into, right? So what you're going to see is the Barbarian for the first build will be focused on stunning enemies and dealing more bleeding damage. So here one of the two-handed weapon of choice is that we'll be stunning enemies, and this will deal the total bleeding damage as physical damage as a bonus damage. And this will be doubled by 200% because it's on a two-hand weapon. And over here we'll be increasing our critical strike chance by 20 up to 40% because of the doubling of 200%. And when we're healthy, we also gain a massive amount of crowd control, which is going to come in terms of slow and also in terms of stun. Now if you guys remember, we do have one way to stun enemies, and that's from ground stop. Every 16 seconds we get a 3-second stun, and this will be extended to like 5 or 6 seconds. Now if we come over to the helmet, when we deal damage against bleeding enemies, we also have a good chance of stunning them, which is 2 seconds, and those perks allows this to be doubled into 4 or 5 seconds. So the helmet itself is going to be essential for this first build, because we'll be stunning enemies and dealing a lot more damage because they're stunned. Now in order to take advantage of the stunned enemies, I decided to go with aspect of retribution for the amulet, which allows us to stun more enemies when they're at range, and also when they attack us at range, and also we will be dealing a lot more damage when enemies are stunned. This is also amplified by the amulet, so 155%, we can get up to 60% more damage against stunned enemies. Now briefly go through the other choices of the offensive perks over here. We'll be going with aspect of expectant, because we'll be getting a lot of resource and also we'll be casting basic spells. So the basic spell is going to be over here, and this is going to be Flay. Flay allows the enemy to take more bleeding damage, and we also be needing Flay to extend the duration of the Wrath of Berserker, because we have to deal direct damage with basic spells, and this will be very important. So here what we'll do is, we'll be dealing basic spells, then core spells allows us to do more damage. And as we critical strike with core spells, we gain additional attack speed. And as you can see over here, we gain more attack speed with basic spells. So the faster we attack, the more fury we gain, the longer the berserk duration is, and also the more damage we deal with the buffs. Now in order to make sure ourselves have a lot of fury, we also have this special ring, particular ring, our special aspects, which allows us to have a chance of gaining 20 furies when we deal direct damage to the bleeding enemies. And this will be very good. Now over here, as for the gloves, when we damage enemies with a core spell, we also extend the duration of Berserk, and this will be doubled when we critical strike. So notice that we have a lot of bleeding, we have lots of Berserk powers, and also we have a lot of benefits when we Berserk. And this also is amplified because we have a lot of critical chance and also a lot of stunning chance. And also if you guys look over here, just as a brief summary of the Paragon, you can see we have 21% increased Berserk duration. So ideally, we want to extend the Berserk duration as long as we can, because with other legendaries, we'll gain more fortified when we deal direct damage while berserking. And if we have a look at the boots, when we are unstoppable, we'll be gaining additional movement speed and also move through enemies. So if you guys have a look at Berserk, you're always unstoppable when you're Berserk. And what that means is, you're always gaining the movement speed buff and you can go through enemies. And this also takes away the dangers of being stuck with enemies, and also, you can move freely and also super fast. Now finally, we also have a chest piece, which allows us to have increased clock duration again by 20%, and this also allows us to deal more damage to enemies who are unstoppable. So one of the downside of this build you're going to see is, if enemies are unstoppable, you can't stun them, and then you can't deal more damage, right? So this chest or this particular legendary kind of compensates for this one, and what you're going to see on the second build is, we're not stunning enemies, because we'll be going for world bosses and also dealing more damage through other method. So before we go over to the second build, what I want to highlight is, you can see I have selected a lot of the offensive perks and also different perks. So this build is a lot of variation. So you can really pick your choices and also go for different combinations. Now, what I want to highlight is this build have a really good potential if you get your hands on some of the amazing two-handed weapons, and those are unique weapons. So the Grandfather allows us to get a much needed critical strike damage, 60 to 100% over here. And this damage will also be doubled over here with the bleeding damage, which will be really good. Now there is also a very special unique two-hand sword which will be perfect for bleeding. So if you come over here, you can see that this two-hand sword will increase the damage enemy take while in the pool by 10%, and this also inflicts additional bleeding damage. So those are really good upgrades in the late game. Now in case you guys are wondering, what happens when you count down enemies? So this is when we have the second variation of the build. So we won't be going with ground stop because we can't stop enemies. We'll be going with war cry because likely the majority of the case that you can't stop enemies is that you're playing against the world boss. And your war cries can benefit other players as well. And war cry will also provide us with more berserking and also more damage reduction. Now if we come over to the legendary choices, you can see over here I have changed the two-handed weapon into additional attack speed when we critical strike. And over here we did keep the increase of critical strike chance because we still want those. And you can see the amulet. I have changed the amulet into countering monsters who are unstoppable. And this allows us to have a massive boost of damage against the world boss and also enemies who cannot be stunned. Now the rest of the choice of legendaries are pretty straightforward. We'll be gaining a little bit more fury, and also here we gain similar method. And I do believe here I have the aspect of expectant, and here we didn't have that one. So what I did over here is, because we'll be gaining more fury when we berserk, we can be dealing more damage because we have higher resource. And over here what I did was, I will also be providing more bleeding damage through berserk. So those are a few of the variations you can see over here, and you can see the entire aspects of legendaries over here is not focused on stunning. This is focused on getting more resource, more berserk, and also more damage directly to the boss. Now if you guys haven't subscribed, it is a really good time to do so, because I'll be covering tons of Diablo 4 related topics and also videos and also guides. We'll be looking to the top meta builds, non-meta builds, leveling up, and also Paragon tricks. We're also looking to the latest events and also official updates, and also changes to different characters and also different builds in the game. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and also turn the notification on, because a lot of you who are watching the videos have not subscribed. You can see 80% of the viewers who are watching our videos have not subscribed, so make sure you subscribe to stay tuned for the latest update for Diablo 4. Now coming over to a final part of the video, so I'm sure you guys are pretty excited for the Paragon board. So having a look at the Paragon board over here, you can see a brief summary of the nodes that is provided. But what it doesn't tell you is, it doesn't tell you what you get from the additional glyph sockets. So the first thing about the Paragon board is, if you haven't seen our previous video, definitely have a look guys, because in the previous video we have a look at what does this Barbarian build provide you with bonus damage. And a quick summary, what you can see is this Barbarian build actually does not have a lot of core critical strike, and it doesn't have any bonus to critical strike. And similarly over here, you can see it does not have any bonus to critical strike. So if we type the search over here, critical strike damage, notice, damage. Notice that for the entire board over here, we don't see any critical strike damage. And for the majority of the board, we don't see any. We do see some over here, but they're very minimal, and they're not massive because we're not using one-hand weapon. So this is one of the reasons over here I decide and I really wanted the Grandfather over here, because this will provide a much needed critical strike damage. And this will be one of the damage sources while many of our weapons will be rolling for critical strike damage and also critical strike chance for the rings and also amulets. Now, similar to most of the pathing for the classes, we'll be taking the right side because we'll deal more physical damage over here. So most of the other classes actually have an increase of raw damage over here, you can see. But for the Barbarian and also the Sources, we'll be dealing additional physical damage or the additional non-physical damage. So those are the difference. Now, as we keep moving through the Paragon board, the first choice of Paragon board I decided to go is with dealing additional damage when wielding a sword. And this one is going to be tremendous, because this will be a new source of damage and you can easily perk over 70 strength. So what this allows us to do is, this allows us to do like over 80 or 90% more damage with using a sword. And we'll be using a two-handed sword. Now, in case you guys are wondering why, if we come over to our previous Barbarian guide, you can see that we want strength and also we want dexterity for the perks of the Paragon board. And if you look into the weapon mastery from Maxor.gg, you can actually see that using a two-handed sword, we'll be gaining additional bleeding damage when killing enemies. And this allows us to deal 30% more damage this way. So ideally guys, if you can find yourself on a really good two-handed sword, this will be very powerful. On the case that if you do not find yourself a two-handed sword, what you can do is, you can come over here and use this glyph first. which allows you to do more damage while berserking and also take less damage from elites. So if we have a look at the second board, it's pretty straightforward. We'll be having damage reduction, we'll also be having more damage over time, which is going to be physical. Now here we can also perk into additional damage over time, additional bleeding damage to enemies, and also more damage over time. Now before we go to the second board, you can see that I'm skipping the legendary over here and also the additional damage perks over here. I have to try to perk into those, but it just takes too far. And if we perk into those, we'll be missing out a lot of other board, and this cannot be achieved without skipping those. Now if you guys have noticed, some of the legendaries I skip just provides us with raw damage, while the other legendaries I'll perk all the way to will provide us with a special ability, like over here killing bleeding enemies grant us berserk for 5 seconds. And also similarly, what we're doing is we're looking for glyphs that provide us with a special ability. So here when we critical strike on this particular glyph, we'll be gaining 3 fury, and those will be very important to gain more fury and also deal more damage. So for the second board, we'll be going with a glyph that provides us with more critical strike damage, and this will be pretty important. Now it is also acceptable if you put this glyph on a different board, because this board only have 29 dexterity. If you go with a different board, you're probably looking at 35 dexterity. So if I have a look over here, so we don't really get much dexterity to be honest. So this is like 17, and this is like 14, this is 19, 24, 29. So 29, we get about 34. So and over here we get about 39, so that means we get 35 dexterity. If you do put this on a different board, you'll be getting more bonus to critical strike damage, and I do think this is also good if you're looking for more damage in this source. Now notice on the second board, I'll be perking into this particular legendary, and this allows me to gain additional berserk duration. And over here we also have a bit of benefits in damage reduction, berserk duration, and also berserk damage. So as we perk towards the third board, you can also see more damage over here against elites and also more damage towards bleeding enemies. And once we get over to the third board, you can see that we'll be skipping the legendary over here because we're not really swapping weapons. And here we'll be getting a lot of benefits against elites and also additional benefits as we kill more elites. So the hunter killer is going to be very good for this particular board. And this will also be providing us with a massive boost of movement speed. So let's have a look at the movement speed while we kill the elite enemies. So we get about 7%, 7%, and also 14%. So this comes up to about 25% or 28% movement speed while killing elite monsters. Now the choice of the glyph I went over here is gonna be the willpower glyph that provides us with more damage with bleeding damage. And this will also have a chance of lowering the cooldown of non-ultimate spells. And this will be very good, because if you lower the cooldown of non-ultimate spells, like the ground stomp, you can also be lowering the cooldowns of your ultimate spells, because over here we'll lower ultimate spells each time we stun multiple enemies. So ideally guys, if you want to have a lower cooldown, you can have this glyph over here over this one. So you can swap the two glyph positions as well for more critical damage and also for early access to the lowering of the spell cooldowns. Now as we perk through the glyph, you also be getting additional physical damage, more physical damage, and also more armor and also more strength. Over here, as we perked into the next section, you can also see additional attack speed, physical damage, and also attack speed. And finally, once you get over to the final board, which is likely after level 90, you can be perking yourself into additional damage against bleeding enemies, and this also provides you with 5% more critical chance. Now there are also some interesting perks over here which provide us with more physical damage and physical damage and physical damage. I know the theme of the game is physical damage, simply because if you come back to bleeding and rend, it is classified as physical damage. Now what you guys gonna notice is, yes, we can make to the fourth board, but I have been skipping a lot of legendaries. So I'm skipping legendary on this one, which we don't really need, and I'm skipping legendary on this one, which we don't really need. I'm just using the shortest board and also the most benefits with the legendary and also rare perks. And finally here, I am skipping this legendary simply because if I go for this one, I can't get to my final board. So let me know what you guys think about the Barbarian, guys. This one took me hours, because trust me, I was going through two different kind of builds with Barbarian, two different concepts. The first one is about stunning and also get more benefit when you stun. The second one is against monsters you cannot stun. And this can work flexibly because you can adjust a few of the legendaries and also adjust a few build. And I do believe this build have a very good potential, simply because we have a lot of increased stun durations. And when you increase stun duration and you stun for like 2 or 3 seconds, this becomes 4 or 5 seconds. And as we lower our cooldowns, we'll be lowering cooldowns with ultimates, lower cooldown with basic spells, and also having more benefits, going in with some amazing uniques in the late game. So let me know what you guys think, guys. I actually am pretty excited for the Barbarian now, and I will be looking into Whirlwind build with Barbarian and maybe a Thorn build with Barbarian. And let me know if you guys are going to plan to play Barbarian, and if you do have a good Barbarian build, let us know in the comments as well. Now before you go, and if you guys didn't know, we have a new YouTube channel. And if you guys haven't subscribed, make sure you subscribe and check out the behind the scenes and also fun clips and also more stories about us. And then you get to know me a little more personally instead of just reading the news and also the games, right? So I want to share a little bit more with you guys. So make sure you check this channel out if you're interested about Matt and also Uni. She's really funny too, and she's really shy. So I want to give her a surprise and do a shout out for the new channel to get some subscribers. Thank you guys. I'll see you guys next time.